In this video, we're going to have a look at some of the key functions of the foreign exchange market, why we need this foreign exchange market to conduct international business. Very broadly, there are two main functions. The foreign exchange market firstly is able to convert the currency of one country into that of another, which is obviously vitally important when you're looking to conduct business transactions on an international scale, and it also provides some insurance against foreign exchange risk, the adverse consequences of which or of unpredictable changes in exchange rates. So that insurance kitty from Progressive Style, it becomes really important, and firms who do seek to actually participate in the foreign exchange market and conduct these international transactions love having some degree at least of insurance, although potentially not as much as Kitty loves her insurance. So we're going to go through each of these two key functions in turn and look at, in particular, that's the latter, how firms can actually provide some insurance against that foreign exchange risk. If we look first, though, at the currency conversion benefit, it means that consumers, of course, can compare the relative price of goods and services from different countries using those exchange rates. They can say, okay, when we convert these Australian dollars into US dollars, you can compare exactly how much the equivalent prices are. International businesses usually have four general uses of that foreign exchange market in line with this. Firstly, to exchange the currency that they have received in the course of doing business abroad back into the currency of its own native country. So of course, if you earn money from the sale of exports, or obviously if you've got a plant or a factory overseas and are selling things in a foreign country, all the money you make from that operations you're going to want to convert back into your own currency so that you can then have those profits back home. It's also useful, conversely, to pay a foreign company for its products or services in the currency for that firm's country. So obviously if you're buying things in a foreign market, or you want to pay that foreign company, then being able to convert your own currency to that firm's native currency to purchase those items becomes really important too. Investing excess cash rather, for short terms in foreign markets is an additional benefit here. What this involves is that when a firm makes a profit, and so it's got a bit of cash sitting around that it would like to invest and gain interest on, what we tend to find is that there will be different rates of interest in different exchange in foreign markets around the world. So, for example, there might be a small percentage of interest on funds in the United States than there might be in the Japanese money market, for example. So a lot of the times a US firm will actually seek to invest its US dollars on the Japanese exchange market, but to do that it needs to, of course, convert its currency, its US dollars, to Japanese yen, so to make more money that way. Firms also look to profit from the short-term movement of funds from one currency in the hope of profiting from shifts in exchange rates, and this is known as currency speculation. So just as firms will look to invest their profits into foreign money markets which have greater rates of interest and therefore provide greater returns, firms also seek to basically convert their currency into those currencies overseas which they think, which they predict in the future will appreciate in value, so that they can get on that that rise before it increases, and then ideally sell and convert that foreign currency back to yours at its peak. So you can actually make money simply from moving your own funds from one currency to another, depending on your ability to predict the rise and fall of certain values of particular currencies. As I said before, the other key function of the foreign exchange market is to provide some level of insurance, meerkat style, against the foreign exchange risks. And when we talk about this, we're referring to the possibility that there will be unpredicted changes in future exchange rates that may have adverse or negative consequences for you as the firm. So what we're talking about here is that sometimes, as we'll talk about already briefly and we'll discuss in more detail in the coming videos, there will be certain events which will trigger a currency to rapidly appreciate or depreciate, more worryingly, in value. And obviously, if you have all of your funds in a particular currency that loses its value very quickly, then that means that you're potentially liable to losing a lot of the value of those funds and profits. So to protect itself against these types of risks, firms look to engage in what is known as hedging. Not that type of hedging. No, we're talking within the context of foreign exchange markets here, and it's slightly different. The foreign exchange market facilitates insurance against these risks through a couple of key options: spot exchange rates, forward exchange rates, and currency swaps. We're going to go through each of these in turn. Alright, as I say, there are a few different ways that you can go about it as a firm. The first is known as a spot exchange, not this type of spotting. No, this is type of currency exchange that occurs when two parties, typically firms, but potentially individuals and banks and so on as well, agree to exchange currency and execute a deal, that is a swap of currencies, immediately. Now imagine, for example, that you as a firm are concerned that your currency in which you have all of your holdings and your profits is going to devalue in the immediate future. You might like to change those profits into a different currency which you see as holding its value or potentially appreciating in value in the future. And a spot exchange is probably the easiest way to do that, is literally where you exchange it depending on whatever exchange rate is occurring at that exact time on the spot, hence the name. So we as travellers engage in this sort of activity all the time ourselves when we go overseas, when we go to the bank or a foreign exchange firm and exchange our Australian dollars into a foreign currency so that we can use that foreign currency to spend overseas. That is an example of a spot exchange. So to illustrate that, going back to our first example, if the current exchange rate is 1 Australian dollar buys you 75 US cents, then the spot exchange will occur at that particular rate. There another option open to you as a firm or as an individual are forward exchanges, and these occur when two parties agree to exchange currency and execute the deal at a specified date somewhere in the future. Now for most currencies that will be either 30 days into the future or 90 days or 180 days. They're common sort of time periods at which these forward exchanges will occur. Now, forward exchanges are actually really important in international business, and I say that because a lot of the time firms will know that they have to pay a supplier or another firm for something in a future time period. So in 30 days, for example, they might have to pay a supplier for the supplies that they deliver. Now, I say that that is problematic because if you rely on a spot exchange, that actually means you'll have to wait the 30-day period and then go with whatever the spot exchange is on that day, that is at the end of the 30-day period. Now that can be a problem because while those 30 days are occurring, there might be a significant devaluation in your nation's currency, and of course that would mean that your Australian dollars, for example, are actually worth less than they were when at the previous higher value. So when there is that devaluation in your nation's currency, you want to avoid spot exchanges in 30 days' time because you'll actually have to pay more of your Australian dollars to pay the same value in a foreign currency if the Australian dollar has depreciated in value. And that's obviously not ideal because it's eating into your profits. So basically, to protect yourself against that, what firms can do is to lock in a forward exchange rate as part of a forward exchange. And it's probably best illustrated using an example. So imagine again that the spot exchange rate, as we said before, is 1 Australian dollar buys 75 US cents. You know that in 30 days' time you're going to have to pay a supplier, and you as a firm are worried that in that 30-day period the Australian dollar is going to depreciate in value. So for example, you might be worried that it is going to drop from 75 US cents down to 50 US cents, which will of course mean you have to pay more Australian dollars to pay the equivalent value. So to protect yourself against that, what you can do is lock in a forward exchange where an institution like a bank will provide you with a forward exchange rate that you can lock in for a 30-day period. And what that will mean is, for example, they might offer you a forward exchange rate of 1 Australian dollar buying US 70 cents. So it's not quite as good as the spot exchange rate of 75 US cents, but it's a whole lot better than the Australian dollar buying only 50 US cents. So if you do choose to lock in that forward exchange rate, what that will mean is that when those 30 days expire and the time comes to pay your supplier, you will be paying them at the rate of 1 Australian dollar buying US 70 cents. So even if the value of the currency is depreciated so that it's now only worth 50 cents, you've locked in the 70-cent rate, which is obviously much better for you as a firm and means you're paying less money. So you can see why the forward exchange is important in providing some insurance against foreign exchange risk. The final type of insurance that the foreign exchange market can provide is through a currency swap. Now this is actually a specific type of a forward exchange, and this is a simultaneous purchase and sale of a given amount of a foreign exchange for two different value dates. It's most common when a firm buys supplies from a certain country and then also sells finished products to that same country. So imagine, for example, that you're an Australian firm and you buy supplies from the US, but you also sell your finished product in the US. So you might know, for example, that you have to pay a US supplier today. So if that's the case, then you will engage in a spot exchange today to give them however much money in US dollars that they need to purchase your supplies. You might also know that in 30 days time, for example, that once you've sold your products over in the United States, you'll be looking to bring the profits, which will be in US dollars, back into Australia and convert them to Australian dollars so you can keep them back at home. If that is the case, and especially if you're worried about the Australian dollar appreciating this time against the US dollar, then you might look to lock in a forward exchange for that 30-day period. The reason why, if you're worried about the Australian dollar appreciating, it means when you're converting your US dollars back into Australian dollars to convert your profits back into your own nation's currency, you'll actually have less money, relatively speaking, if the Australian dollar is appreciating relative to the US dollar, which of course, conversely, is depreciating relative to the Australian dollar. So that has an impact on your profitability and your ability to convert those profits back into the same value of Australian dollars. So if you're worried about that Australian dollar appreciation, then you can lock in the forward exchange rate again so that if it does appreciate in that 30-day period, you're protecting yourself against any potential loss of profits when you do come to convert those funds back into Australian dollars in 30 days' time. So you can see with the currency swap, it's the same principle as the general forward exchanges that we spoke about previously. You're hedging yourself against the risk of variations in a certain currency's value. Previously, we were concerned about the Australian dollar depreciating or devaluing. With the currency swap, the example that we're citing here, you're worried about the Australian dollar appreciating and going up in value. Regardless of which direction you're concerned about, the main idea is that you protect yourself through that insurance of either a forward exchange or a currency swap in the foreign exchange market.